Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What a great event this is, that number one, that we're all still standing up after 50 years. But really, it's such a pleasure. I remember when I first spoke to Ellen Ryan and Amy Oshinsky and Whaley about perhaps trying to do something to honor the beginning of our 50th year. Those of you out in the audience who are Yaleys of the class of 1977. I was frankly surprised that anyone remembered the day back in the early September when Pat, John, and I first started playing together under an elm tree in front of the center entryway of Durfee. I'm not sure how everybody remembered that, but I was delighted that they did, but also that we have an occasion to come and celebrate with all of you. But in addition to that, and I think as some of you know, today is the day that we are releasing our most recent, I don't know if you call it a record album anymore, CDs. Raise your hand if you still have a CD player somewhere. But the name of the CD is Brotherhood, because during our time at Yale, many of you remember your time at Yale, many of you remember your vacations more than you remember your classes. And during our vacations, we were lucky enough to spend them all on the island of Nantucket, playing at a whaling bar called the Brotherhood of Thieves. And we have a few people who actually remember that. People have gone on to extremely successful lives after having spent time with aprons around their waists at the Brotherhood. And some of them are here tonight with us. And in fact, the theme of this new album of ours, called Brotherhood, has a lot to do with that. We'll talk more about those songs as we go on tonight. But to get us off and started before we do any music, we thought it would be fun to ask one of those former waitresses, one of those former waiting staffs from the Brotherhood, who has since gone on and had an extremely successful career as an actress, and most recently as an nationally award-winning Moth winner, to come up. We commissioned her to tell a story about Nantucket, and we haven't heard it, so we'll be as surprised as you. But will you join me in welcoming Francesca Sobrer?
It is really just a thrill to be here this evening and to not see all your faces. The bouncing of cars rolling over cobblestones, the shouts of youth clamoring on wood stairs for the race down to the beach, the flapping of clothing being tossed into the air, splashes followed by squeals. These are the sounds of my childhood. When I was 14, my parents made a bold decision. They gave up all the trappings of their suburban New Jersey life and moved our family to Nantucket Island. For me, that move was an ending, an end to a life I was just starting to wonder about. For my parents, it was the beginning of a life they had always dreamed. The click and whir of a deli slicer, the clank and squeak of metal on top of metal as one bread oven door after another is opened and closed, the screen door clapping on its frame as strangers come in and out, in and out. These are also the sounds of my childhood. My mother opened a bakery and delicatessen in what should have been the kitchen and living room of our home. How brave for her. How awful for me. On those days when, as a teenager, it was my right to stomp upstairs in some state of indignation, of some slighting, I had to instead politely say, excuse me, as I push my way through a throng of strangers and go upstairs to my room, and do not slam that door. I would lie in bed and wonder, when will this end? And when do I begin? The tinkling of glassware tucked into tones of conversation. The soft slap of a tin plate being slipped onto a metal counter. A heavy wooden door squeaks and thuds, letting the hungry and thirsty in, the satisfied and tipsy out. These are the sounds of my early 20s. The swishing of a glass washer plays constantly under the music of, well, I don't really know what kind of music exactly. I only know the eyes, the blue eyes of the saxophone player who tracks my move as I walk by. I try to move as if I don't notice that there's a charge in the air, but electrons are flying. Oh, it isn't just the smell of possible sex. It is something else. Like the band whose music I can't identify, I will not be able to label this moment then. I will have to wait a few years. But in that moment, the four-piece band tucked into a corner of a small pub that was once a basement, playing their soft jazz, classic, country. I really do want to know what kind of music, but I'm feeling too shy to ask. Besides, the name of the game at the moment is to look like I am one step ahead, to walk that confident walk, the one I saw on a stranger and thought, yeah, I'm walking that walk. I'm handing out menus, clearing dishes, wiping tables, side notes of silverware on platters, murmured conversations, wooden chairs scraping on a concrete floor slide in and out of the music. Everyone is wrapped in the listening. Well, I wonder about the saxophone player. He catches my eye, and this time I smile, well, because I've learned this much. There's another game of maybe, and then maybe again before we get to a yes. The audience is doing a collective head bobbing, a kind of reverence is being paid as each instrument is coaxed into sound. The handsome man hunched over his guitar, hoping to beguile. The other guitarist playing so thoughtfully, I can feel his earnest. The violinist glides in, stirring it up, humming it down. The saxophone player shows off his versatility by playing the flute. Suddenly, I feel like I'm sliding down a sand dune and skipping naked into the water. Between songs, one of the players asks me for a drink, and I seize the opportunity to ask the saxophone player, "Can I get you one too?" His eyes lock on mine, a side smile. We're still at a maybe, but yes, it's starting to look pretty good. Its last call noises of a restaurant getting ready to close begin. The smashing of the cracking of chairs onto tables, the shuddering of candles being blown out. The swish of the glass washer goes to a hum. The musicians are putting their instruments away. The handsome guitarist has already left with a big grin on his face. The young woman following him was also grinning. The violinist shakes his head and says, "Ah," and another one falls for the prince. I try to catch the eye of the saxophone player, and I do. So of course I look away. The manager is locking up, the other waitresses are getting ready to go, and I wonder, should I linger or do I stay? Because this game of maybe is just so much fun. I try a sachet and say goodnight. Outside, I pause for just a moment, pretending to look for something that isn't in my bag. The door opens behind me. It's the saxophone player. He looks at me, his curly hair in a soft tangle, one strap of his overalls undone, and asks, "May I walk you home?" The electrons of the early evening follow us sizzling in the dense fog as we walk up one cobblestone street and down another to my family's home, the delicatessen, at the end of a short sandy driveway. Okay, it's not what you think, but it is. And well, really, there'll be a lot of naked swimming over that summer and wild rides through the moor. But later, years later, I will see that delicious moment of electrons flying, that something else that made the hairs on my arms stand up, that was my beginning. It was the beginning of making lifelong friends, the start of long conversations that would go late into the night, conversations of wonder, of possibility, with friends who encourage. You can do more than that with friends who comfort in times of what feels like unspeakable loss. It was the budding discovery of self. I had finally come to a place where I knew I belonged.